My wife invited me to a dinner with her Italian contractor. I kept quiet and pretended I didn't understand Italian. But then I heard her say something that made my blood freeze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My name is Nicholas Cooper, and at 57 years old, I thought I knew everything there was to know about my wife. After 30 years of marriage, I believed Jessica and I had no secrets between us. I was dead wrong about that. It started on a Tuesday morning in March when Jessica approached me with unusual excitement in her voice. I was sitting at our kitchen table reading the newspaper and sipping coffee from the same blue ceramic mug I'd used for the past 12 years. The morning light filtered through our yellow curtains, casting familiar shadows across the oak table my father had built decades ago. "Nicholas, darling," Jessica said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted something. "I have wonderful news about the business." I looked up from the sports section, noting how she'd applied her makeup more carefully than usual. Her dark hair was styled in that way she reserved for important occasions, and she wore the burgundy blouse I'd bought her for Christmas 3 years ago. At 49, she still had that energy that had first attracted me when we met at a police department charity event back in 1994. "What kind of news?" I asked, folding the newspaper. She practically bounced on her toes. "Remember how I've been working on expanding my interior design business? Well, I've connected with this amazing Italian contractor who wants to discuss a partnership. He's local but has connections back to Italy. Anthony Rossi." The way she said his name made something stir in my chest, though I couldn't identify what. Jessica had been running her small interior design business for about 6 years now, ever since our finances became tighter after I took early retirement from the police force. My pension was solid at $3,800 a month, but it wasn't the same as my detective's salary. "That sounds promising," I said, though something felt off about her excitement. "What's his background?" "He specializes in high-end renovation work, residential and commercial projects. He's particularly interested in expanding his client base through designer partnerships." She paused, touching her pearl necklace nervously. "He's taking us to dinner Thursday night at Bella Vista. You know, that expensive Italian place downtown." Bella Vista. I knew it well. It was the kind of restaurant where dinner for two could easily cost $200, far beyond what we'd normally spend on our retirement budget. But if this contractor was paying, I supposed it made sense for a potential business partnership. "All right," I agreed. "What time?" 7. "And Nicholas, please wear your Navy suit, the one from our anniversary dinner last year. First impressions matter in business." What Jessica didn't know, what she had never known in all our years together, was that I spoke fluent Italian. It wasn't something I advertised or felt particularly proud of. During my time with the police force, I'd been selected for an 18-month NATO liaison program in Italy back in 1995. Those months had given me more than just international law enforcement experience. They'd given me a complete grasp of the Italian language and deep appreciation for the culture. I'd learned it out of necessity at first, working with Italian police on cross-border investigations and organized crime cases. But it became something more. Late nights in Roman cafes talking with local officers, understanding not just their words, but their humor, their frustrations, their pride in their work. The language became a bridge to understanding people in a way that went beyond police procedures. When I returned home and got more serious with Jessica, I never mentioned it. She came from what she considered a more refined background, always talking about her college education in art history and her sophisticated tastes. My working-class police background seemed crude in comparison. The Italian felt like something too personal, too much a part of a version of myself I'd left behind overseas. Over the years, there had been moments when my knowledge might have been useful or interesting to share, but somehow it never felt like the right time. Thursday evening arrived with an unseasonable chill in the air. I dressed in my navy suit as requested, the same one I'd worn to our 29th wedding anniversary dinner just 6 months ago. Jessica looked stunning in a black dress I didn't recognize, with jewelry that seemed more expensive than anything I remembered buying her on my detective salary. When I complimented the necklace, she waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, this old thing. I've had it forever. Found it in the back of my jewelry box." We drove to Bella Vista in relative silence, Jessica checking her makeup in the passenger mirror more times than necessary. I found myself studying her profile, noticing things that my detective training had taught me to observe. The slight tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at her phone, the nervous energy that seemed different from simple business meeting anxiety. The restaurant sat on the corner of 5th and Main, its warm, golden light spilling onto the sidewalk through large windows. The scent of garlic, basil, and fresh bread greeted us before we even entered. The maitre d' led us to a corner table where a man was already waiting. Anthony Rossi looked to be in his early 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and the kind of confident posture that spoke of success. He wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than I made in a month as a retired cop, and his watch caught the light in a way that suggested serious money. "Jessica?" "Bellissima," he said, standing to kiss her on both cheeks. The familiarity of the gesture struck me as odd for what Jessica had described as a new business contact, but I told myself different cultures had different customs. As a cop, I'd learned not to jump to conclusions too quickly. "Anthony, I'd like you to meet my husband, Nicholas," Jessica said, her voice slightly breathless in a way I hadn't heard in years. Anthony extended his hand with the firm grip of a man accustomed to making deals. "Pleasure to meet you, Nicholas. Jessica has told me so much about you." "Likewise," I replied, though Jessica had actually told me very little about him beyond the basic business proposition. As we settled into our seats, I noticed how Jessica positioned herself slightly closer to Anthony than to me. It was subtle, the kind of body language that my years of detective work had trained me to observe. People reveal more through their unconscious movements than they ever do with their words. The waiter appeared almost immediately, as if he'd been watching for Anthony's arrival. Anthony ordered a bottle of wine in perfect English, but with just enough of an accent to remind us of his heritage. The waiter's eyes widened with appreciation when he heard the vintage selection, something that probably cost more than Jessica and I spent on groceries in a month. "So, Nicholas," Anthony said as the wine was being poured with elaborate ceremony, "Jessica tells me you're retired from police work. That must be satisfying, serving your community for so many years. Very honorable profession." There was something in his tone that felt slightly condescending, though his smile remained pleasant. It was the kind of tone I'd heard from defense attorneys and suspects who thought they were smarter than the cops investigating them. "It was honest work," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. 30 years on the force, kept our family secure and gave me good pension benefits. Of course, very admirable. And now you can enjoy your retirement while Jessica builds her empire, eh?" He gestured toward my wife with obvious admiration. Jessica laughed, a sound that had once made my heart skip, but now seemed performed. "Anthony, you flatter me. It's hardly an empire." "But it will be," Anthony said, his eyes locked on hers. "With the right partnerships, the right connections, beautiful work can reach beautiful places." As the evening progressed, I began cataloging the small details that didn't add up. The way Jessica laughed at Anthony's jokes, throwing her head back in a manner I hadn't seen in years. The way she touched his arm when making a point, lingering just a moment longer than business would require. The way they seemed to share some private understanding that excluded me entirely. Their conversation flowed easily between business topics and personal observations. Anthony described his renovation projects, Jessica shared her design philosophy, and I played the role of the supportive husband, nodding and asking appropriate questions. But my detective instincts were humming. Something about their dynamic felt rehearsed, like actors who had performed this scene before. Then it happened. Anthony made a comment about the wine in Italian, something casual about the vineyard's location. To my complete shock, Jessica responded in the same language. "Luigi," Jessica said quietly in Italian, glancing nervously in my direction. "We shouldn't talk like this in front of him." My blood went cold, but I kept my expression neutral, continuing to cut my veal as if I hadn't understood a word. In 30 years of marriage, Jessica had never, not once, mentioned speaking Italian. She'd taken French in college, complained about struggling with it, and claimed she had no talent for languages. Anthony glanced at me with casual amusement. "Rilassati. Non capisce niente. È completamente all'oscuro. Relax. He doesn't understand anything. He's completely in the dark." The words hit me like a physical blow. They were talking about me as if I were a piece of furniture, assuming I was too ignorant to comprehend their conversation. But I forced myself to remain calm, to keep chewing my food and occasionally nodding when they switched back to English to include me in meaningless discussion about the restaurant's atmosphere. "È così facile ingannarlo," Jessica replied with a soft laugh that cut through me like broken glass. "It's so easy to deceive him." I had heard those words in many contexts during my police career: suspects bragging to accomplices, criminals planning their next moves. But hearing them from my wife's lips, in reference to me, created a pain I'd never experienced before. This wasn't just betrayal, this was contempt. As the night wore on, their Italian conversations became bolder, more intimate. They discussed things that made my stomach turn. Details about our private life that Jessica had no business sharing, observations about my routines, my habits, my supposed limitations. Anthony called me il vecchio stupido, the stupid old man. Jessica not only agreed, but elaborated, painting a picture of a naive husband who suspected nothing. "Scusa," I said finally, pushing back from the table. "I need to use the restroom." In the restaurant's bathroom, I stood in front of the mirror and tried to process what I was witnessing. The man staring back at me looked older than his 57 years, shocked by a revelation that had turned his understanding of his life upside down. My wife of 30 years was not only fluent in a language she'd hidden from me, but she was using that language to mock and belittle me with another man. I splashed cold water on my face and took several deep breaths. My detective training kicked in, overriding the emotional shock. Gather information. Document everything. Don't reveal what you know until you understand the full scope of what you're dealing with. When I returned to the table, they were deep in conversation, their heads close together like lovers sharing secrets. I caught fragments of Italian that made my chest tighten with something beyond hurt. "Presto," Jessica was saying in a low voice. "Soon it will be over." "Hai fatto tutto quello che ti ho detto?" Anthony asked. "Have you done everything I told you?" "Sì, tutto è a posto," she replied, her voice carrying a satisfaction that chilled me. "Yes, everything is in place. Non sospetta nulla." He suspects nothing. I sat down heavily, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for my water glass. They barely acknowledged my return, smoothly transitioning back to English discussion about Anthony's supposed furniture connections and Jessica's design expertise. But now I could see it for what it was: an elaborate performance designed to fool the stupid old man who didn't understand anything. The rest of the dinner passed in a surreal blur. I nodded and smiled when expected, made appropriate comments about the food and wine, even thanked Anthony for his hospitality. But inside, my world was fracturing piece by piece. Every shared glance between them, every casual touch, every private smile was another crack in the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my marriage. As we prepared to leave, Anthony kissed Jessica goodbye on both cheeks again, but this time I saw what I had missed before. This wasn't professional courtesy between potential business partners. This was intimate, familiar, laden with meaning that excluded me entirely. In the car on the way home, Jessica chattered excitedly about the business opportunity, about how Anthony was going to transform her little design consultancy into something much bigger and more profitable. That night, as Jessica fell asleep next to me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered what exactly would be over soon. The phrase echoed in my mind like a threat I couldn't quite decipher. After 30 years of marriage, I thought I'd been sharing my bed with someone I knew completely. Instead, I was lying next to a stranger who spoke a secret language and made plans I couldn't understand. The next morning, I couldn't concentrate on anything. Jessica bustled around the kitchen, humming Italian, songs I'd never heard her sing before, as if the previous evening had filled her with new energy. Her mood was almost manic in its cheerfulness. "Wasn't Anthony wonderful?" she said, buttering her toast with quick, excited movements. "I can't believe how lucky we are that he chose to work with us. This could change everything for our future, Nicholas." Our future. The irony wasn't lost on me, especially given what I'd overheard about things being over soon. Once her car disappeared down our tree-lined street for what she claimed was a client consultation, I did something I'd never done before in our marriage. I searched her things systematically, using every technique I'd learned in 30 years of police work. I started with her desk in the small room she'd converted into her office 3 years ago. The drawers appeared organized at first glance, filled with fabric samples, client folders, and business cards from various suppliers. Everything looked legitimate until I applied the same scrutiny I'd used on suspect evidence. In the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a stack of design magazines, I found a folder that stopped my heart. Bank statements from an account I'd never seen before. An account in Jessica's name only, with a current balance of $28,500. I sat heavily in her chair, my detective training taking over as I analyzed the evidence. The statements went back 14 months, showing regular deposits in round numbers. $2,000 here, $3,000 there, sometimes as much as $4,000 at once. The timing made my stomach clench with recognition. These deposits coincided perfectly with periods when Jessica had told me her business was struggling, when she'd asked me to cover more of our household expenses with my police pension. The pattern was clear and damning. Money from my $3,800 monthly pension had been subsidizing our living expenses while Jessica funneled her actual income into this secret account. But that wasn't the worst part. I walked to the kitchen and pulled out the folder where we kept our important documents. The mortgage papers were there, signed by both of us 18 months ago. $25,000 against a house that had been paid off for 15 years. The house my father had built with his own hands, the foundation of whatever financial security we had in retirement. The money had supposedly gone into our joint account for Jessica's business expansion. But looking at her secret account statements, I could see exactly where it had really gone. Regular transfers timed perfectly to coincide with our mortgage payments hitting our shared account. She'd been systematically stealing from me, from us, moving our money, my father's legacy, into her private account while claiming her business needed support. The phone rang, making me jump. I grabbed it on the third ring, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nicholas? This is Dr. Ryan Stevens." Dr. Stevens had been our family physician for 12 years, ever since we'd moved to this neighborhood. Good man, thorough and caring. "Hello, doctor. Is everything all right? I was calling about Jessica's appointment yesterday. I wanted to follow up on the test results we discussed." My mind went blank. Test results? There was a pause. The blood work for her thyroid condition. She mentioned you'd been concerned about her recent weight loss and energy changes. Jessica had lost about 15 pounds over the past few months. When I'd asked about it, she'd said the business stress was affecting her appetite. She'd never mentioned seeing Dr. Stevens about it, and she certainly hadn't mentioned thyroid problems. The tests came back normal, which is good news, Dr. Stevens continued. She seemed relieved. Said she'd been worried about how the stress might be affecting her health, especially with all the consulting work she's been doing in the Italian community. Italian community. Another lie. Another layer of deception. Actually, Nicholas, Dr. Stevens' voice carried a note of concern. Jessica mentioned you've been having some memory issues lately, forgetting conversations, seeming confused about her schedule. At your age, it's important not to ignore these things. You really should come in for a checkup. The room spun around me. Not only had Jessica been stealing our money and living a secret life, but she'd been telling our family doctor that I was having cognitive problems. She was building a medical narrative about my mental decline. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the evidence spread before me. Bank statements showing systematic theft, a mortgage against my father's house, medical lies designed to make me look mentally unstable, Italian conversations about plans being in place and things being over soon. I needed help, and I knew exactly who to call. Brandon Thompson had been my partner during the last 5 years of my police career. He'd retired 2 years before me and started a private investigation business specializing in insurance, fraud, and domestic cases. More importantly, he was one of the few people I trusted completely. Nicholas, Brandon's familiar voice boomed through the phone. How are you holding up in retirement, old friend? I need help, Brandon. The kind that requires discretion and someone with your particular skills. The cheerfulness disappeared from his voice immediately. Brandon had always been sharp, and he caught the seriousness in my tone. What kind of trouble are you in? The kind where my wife and her lover are planning something very bad, and I think it involves my life insurance policy? There was a long pause. Jesus, Nicholas, are you sure about this? Dead sure. Literally. Can you meet me? Remember that diner near the old precinct? Murphy's. Tomorrow morning, 9 to 4 a.m. I'll be there. Nicholas, listen to me carefully. Don't change anything about your routine. Don't let them know you suspect anything. And whatever you do, don't confront them directly. If they're planning what I think they might be planning, cornering them could be dangerous. The next morning I sat across from Brandon in a corner booth at Murphy's Diner, the same place we'd grabbed breakfast before difficult cases for years. I showed him everything: the bank statements, the mortgage documents, the pattern of lies about my supposed memory problems. Brandon studied the evidence with the same methodical approach he'd brought to our investigations. This is some cold-blooded planning, Nicholas. Your wife's been setting this up for months, maybe longer. The financial manipulation, the medical gaslighting, building a case that you're mentally unstable. It's textbook preparation for elder abuse. Can we stop them? Brandon looked up from the documents, his expression grim but determined. We can do better than that. We can catch them red-handed. But it's going to require you to play along for a few more days. Can you handle that? What do you mean? We let them think their plan is working. Let Jessica believe you're the confused, helpless old man she's been describing to your doctor. Meanwhile, we document everything. Build a case that will destroy them in court. Over the next hour, Brandon outlined his plan. It was elaborate, risky, and required precise timing. But if it worked, Jessica and Anthony wouldn't just be caught. They'd be trapped by their own greed and arrogance, with enough evidence to put them away for years. Brandon spent the next few days setting everything up with the precision of a military operation. hidden cameras in strategic locations throughout the house, audio recording equipment that could capture conversations from 3 rooms away, and contacts with federal agents who specialized in elder fraud cases. Most importantly, he arranged for a medical team standing by just outside our neighborhood, ready to intervene if anything went wrong with our plan. The key, Brandon explained during our final briefing, is making them think they've completely succeeded. We let them go, through with whatever they're planning, but we control every variable. You'll never actually be in danger, but they won't know that. Sunday arrived gray and cold, with the kind of bitter wind that cuts right through your coat. Jessica returned from what she'd claimed was a weekend consulting trip to the Italian district downtown. She looked refreshed and excited, practically glowing with anticipation. "How are you feeling?" she asked, studying my face with what I now recognized as calculation rather than concern. "You look a little pale, sweetheart. A little tired, maybe." "Nothing serious. I played my part perfectly, the confused elderly husband who didn't suspect anything." "Well, you should probably take it easy tonight. I brought you something special from my trip. Authentic Italian tea that Anthony recommended specifically for circulation and heart health. He said his grandmother in Sicily swore by it. Italian tea." My heart pounded as I realized this was it. The moment everything would come to a head. Jessica disappeared into the kitchen, and I could hear her moving around, opening cabinets, running water. Through the hidden audio equipment, Brandon's team was recording every sound, every movement. This was the most important performance of my life, and I couldn't afford to make a single mistake. "Here we go," she said, returning with a steaming mug on a small tray. "This should help you sleep better. You've been so restless lately." The tea smelled like chamomile, with an underlying medicinal odor that made my skin crawl. I accepted the mug with hands that shook just slightly. Perfect for someone with supposedly declining health. "Thank you. You're always taking such good care of me." Something flickered across her face at those words. Guilt? Regret? Or just annoyance that I was being sentimental at an inconvenient moment? "Drink it while it's hot," she urged. "It works better that way." I lifted the mug to my lips and took a small sip. The liquid was bitter beneath. The herbal flavor, confirming what Brandon and I had suspected. They were using some kind of drug designed to simulate heart failure, probably something that would be difficult to detect in a routine autopsy. "It's good," I lied, taking another sip. "Different from what we usually have. It's a very special blend. Anthony has connections to import the authentic ingredients from Italy." I drank about half the tea, then set the mug down and leaned back in my chair. "That hits the spot. I think I might turn in early tonight. That's a good idea. You need your rest." But in her voice, I heard anticipation rather than concern. She was waiting for the drug to take effect, watching for the first signs that her plan was working. 20 minutes later, I began the performance that would either save my life or end it. I pressed my hand to my chest and winced. "Nicholas, what's wrong?" "Just a little tightness." "Probably nothing." I gasped slightly, making it look like breathing was becoming difficult. Her eyes sharpened, and I saw her glance at the clock. Right on schedule. 5 minutes later, I doubled over with a groan, clutching my chest with both hands. "Something's wrong. The pain. It's getting worse." "Maybe I should call 911, she said, but her tone lacked real urgency. She was going through the motions, establishing her concerned wife routine for when investigators asked questions later. No. Help me to the bedroom. I'll lie down for a while." She supported me as I stumbled toward our room, my performance becoming more dramatic with each step. By the time we reached the bed, I was gasping for breath and clutching my left arm in textbook cardiac distress symptoms. "Nicholas, "You're scaring me," she said, but I could hear the excitement beneath her fear. The phone rang. Jessica answered quickly, and I could tell from her hushed conversation that it was Anthony checking in. Yes. He drank it all. Yes, it's working exactly like you said. The $180,000 life insurance policy will pay, out within weeks once the death certificate is processed. I let my breathing become increasingly shallow and irregular, my movements weaker and more erratic. Finally, I went completely limp, staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Jessica sat watching me for several minutes, making sure I was really gone before calling for help. When she finally dialed 911, her performance was Oscar-worthy. "Please hurry," she sobbed into the phone. "I can't lose him. We've been married for 30 years. After the paramedics, actually Brandon's team, pronounced me dead and took my body away, I was driven to Brandon's surveillance center. Through monitors, I watched Jessica's transformation from grieving widow to celebrating criminal." She immediately called Anthony. "It's done. He's gone." The stupid old man never suspected a thing. When Anthony arrived 30 minutes later, they fell into each other's arms like lovers reunited. Moving to the living room with expensive wine, they toasted their success. To our freedom," Anthony said, raising his glass. "To us," Jessica replied, "and to never having to pretend again." For over an hour, they discussed their future, selling the house, collecting the insurance money, moving to Anthony's supposed connections in Italy. They were so confident, so proud of their perfect crime. That's when the FBI burst through the door. "Jessica Cooper, Anthony Rossi, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, insurance fraud, and elder abuse." Through the monitor, I watched my wife's face transform from confusion to absolute terror. "This is impossible," she screamed. "My husband is dead." "Actually," Brandon said, walking in with a laptop, "your husband is very much alive and has been working with federal investigators to document your entire murder conspiracy." 3 months later, Jessica and Anthony were sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The $180,000 insurance policy, our house, my pension, everything they'd planned to steal remained mine. As I sat in my kitchen that morning after their sentencing, watching the sunrise over the garden I'd tended for decades, I reflected on what I'd learned. Sometimes the experiences that seem most disconnected from our current lives, like learning Italian during a NATO assignment 28 years ago, turn out to be exactly what saves us when we need it most. At 57, I was starting over, but I wasn't starting empty-handed. I had my freedom, my financial security, and most importantly, the knowledge that the skills and experiences we accumulate over a lifetime aren't just memories gathering dust. They're tools waiting in our personal arsenal, ready to serve us when we least expect to need them. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been illuminating. I learned that survival isn't just about being lucky or strong. It's about recognizing when to use everything you've ever learned and having the courage to act on that knowledge when it matters most.